I actually think it would be good to just hear from the audience a little bit about their thoughts and feelings about capacity development and what the needs are, and perhaps maybe hear from people about what they're actively working on. So I set this up a little bit more informally. Are you all familiar with the fishbowl paradigm and how that works? Is anyone that's not familiar with fishbowl? Okay. I mean, so basically the idea is that people just sit around and talk, right? And they, in general, what we say is we like to speak from experience. But I think in this case, being able to speak on opinion, I think, is a reasonable thing as well. So I'm going to go ahead and sit down and start, and then if people want to jump in and maybe talk a little bit as well, we can just make this more of an interactive conversation. Because I don't want to do the talking for an hour. I want this to be everyone talking, okay?
We're going to have about half an hour.
Oh, during this half-hour conversation. So within OpenMRS, you know, here, I'm in a position of having to try to be supportive of a much larger community and hopefully ultimately be supportive of other communities forming. That's really where I've been thinking about a lot of things lately. And I think OpenMRS has an important role in helping support centers of excellence. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but you know, more specifically, I wanted to get into a little bit of the details of what that actually means. It wasn't something, the Centers of Excellence idea wasn't something that I really understood until maybe about 7 to 8 months ago, and it was largely stimulated by some conversations I had with the HISP India group. So HISP is actually an organization that is responsible for a piece of software called DHIS, and I had always assumed that HISP's sole focus was on DHIS, but actually HISP as an organization wants to do more than DHIS, and they've taken on an interest in working on patient-level record systems, and they're interested in using OpenMRS, and so their initial approach was to come to me actually and say, hey, can you come and get OpenMRS up and going for us in India? And of course, that's completely inconsistent with the way we want to grow the community. What we really want to see is that the HISP group becomes proficient at doing that themselves. And so, what I encouraged Sandeep to do, some time ago, was to build up their local capacity, and when we would, in partnership with them, provide mentored experiences, and where we would potentially place people like key members of our community in certain types of learning activities. So, like for example, the HISP India group is doing a pilot implementation of medical record systems in district hospitals in one of the states in India. Ultimately, what we're probably going to do is either have people from India come to Indianapolis, or potentially have some of the key members go to India at key points. I actually went a few months ago to kind of get things kicked off. But ultimately, I think that's an investment that we have to make, and that obviously is not a free investment. It's a time investment. It's a resource investment. And so, what I've asked in return of the Hispania group is that if we go and get 1 or 2 people established, that in return they have to be obliged to go and do that for others as well. So I think the plan of that is that we start by getting people going, and the return on our investment is that they do that for others. And so the Hispania group is going to commit to doing that to a certain level within their country, and then I think they'll hopefully also be responsible for seeding other states with these groups as well. So that's just one thought that I've had about centers of excellence.
Sorry, Paul, you mentioned that this pay-it-forward idea of asking someone to go in and start setting someone else up again. I think there's a lot of people in the room who've put together some implementation teams, and we're trying to build a developer team at GEMBI now. From your perspective, what are some of the processes in setting up a center of excellence, a checklist that we can start to move through to get there?
I don't fully have the answers to all that. It's still formative in my mind. But I guess the one thing that I would say is that you need to have ultimately the people that are leading these centers of excellence need to understand the discrete ways in which one would both conceptualize, build, and support a system. And so I think probably the first step towards building a center of excellence is to have a team that the collective together could do that independently of us, right? So I think the step number one is build the expertise within that group such that they understand how to do it independently, or at least know how to go and get the proper resources to do it themselves. I think once that's in place, then, and that's something that we probably have to do in concert with them, then I think they have to internally grow their organization such that there's enough redundancy within the team that some of those people can go and teach others. And so I think then it's a matter of teaching internally. So I think you get you build a team of mentors, and then you have them actually as part of both solidifying their own knowledge and growing their team, they're teaching others, right? So it's the see one, do one, teach one approach, right? So you build up a team within there. And then ultimately you would want that team or the leadership of that to go and help another one. So I think that's the basic model just at a high level. So do you have some more specific questions about it?
Yeah, I think that's the approach that was formulating my mind. But in terms of actually bringing people up within OpenMRS, I separate into implementers, developers, and strategists, and being able to design implementations and support them as well as developing for them. Now, I've been very privileged to work with Ryan, Daniel, and Pascal recently. And unfortunately, I don't think Pascal's in the session, otherwise I'd ask him to relate some of his experiences in coming into the OpenMRS community and the features and some of the drawbacks and the blockages that we've met in it. But from a developer point of view, we're working towards getting best practices in place, and we've obviously spent the hackathon out here with the guys. What are the next steps for us to do? How do we evolve to a standard where you can look towards a South African group or any group in particular and say, this here is, you guys are getting towards that center of excellence?
I think what you're asking is you're looking for some kind of endorsement or affirmation that you're moving in the right direction. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
A bit of that, but also how would we have to do it again? We've done a lot of trial and error in terms of try this, learn this, hopefully it works going forward. If you were given a blank piece of paper in front of you saying, now let's design the new center of excellence, what are some of the high points if you were going to put together a developer team they need to do?
Well, I think the key thing that's been missing from the GEMBI experience thus far is that we haven't maybe been as hands-on as we should be, right? So you all have been trying to just learn by jumping in the pool, right? I mean, so we try to, we're starting the commitment to you by, for example, being with you for a hackathon for a week and getting Ben and some of and Darius and the team out here. And I think you all need some mentorship, right? And I think we have to be willing to commit to that. And Burke will be the first to tell you. I mean, I've been trying to push people towards doing less of the direct work ourselves and instead kind of passing the work off as a learning experience, right? So, for example, instead of us doing some of the core development, we need to be prepared to spend that time instead preparing in our minds how we would tell others to do it, and then watching other people through that by managing them. And so I think that's a strategy that's beginning to evolve. Ben, for example, if you were to look at his code output, it's probably actually going down over the past couple of years because, I mean, up front he was pretty much doing all of the development, right? But the more that he spends time conceptualizing what other people should do, the more people have risen up, and you see actually the volunteer contributions are going up because we've kind of describe them in a way that other people can grab them and do them. And I think probably the ultimate step of that will be not only does he do that, but he also spends quite a bit of time directly working with people one-on-one to build up that expertise.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I thought Ben was just getting lazy. Hopefully he's not here. I think a number of us in the room here are involved in this AMIA GPP, the Global Partnership Program, which is trying to build up a capacity and a training program alongside the implementation of EMRs. So I think this plays directly into that, and Paul, you're obviously very familiar with that as well. Andy's involved, Rosemary's involved, etc. I'm just interested to know what the various levels, I guess it relates to what Carl was saying. If we talk about training people for electronic medical record implementations, developments, customizations, implementations. I'm interested to hear the opinions as to what level of training people think is needed. I mean, we've previously run a master's program in medical informatics at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Carl, in fact, is a product of that program, so that's, I guess, a useful product, hopefully. Is that the kind of model that we're looking at? Are we looking at more hands-on training? Is it training courses? Is it academic programs? That's the sort of thing I'm interested in knowing more about.
I know the PIH will have something to add to this, but I'll just speak from my experience. I think it really depends on the individual. I think at some level, each individual kind of comes to the table with different sets of expertise. So for example, I could walk up to someone in the grocery store and I could commit to teaching them OpenMRS, but it would be different than if I walked up to Daniel versus walking up to someone that didn't have any computer expertise, right? So I think the key discriminating factor as to what education they need is based upon certain kind of key proficiencies, I guess. And then I think once you can establish those proficiencies, those key didactic proficiencies, then I believe very strongly that the majority of the learning actually happens through a mentored, actual real-world experience. Because I've looked at I have a number of colleagues who have gone through informatics programs where they really are more focused on the didactics than they are the actual training, and they come out very unprepared to do real projects, because so much of informatics is in feeling the pain of the complexity, and the complexity is not something that you can write about and understand. It's something you have to feel firsthand. So I think there's a place for both a didactic component, which brings people up to a certain level of proficiency against some key metrics, but I think afterwards has to come a practical didactic experience. So
just to support that, those elements in developing environment, or I just come from the other one, OpenMRS implementation, and really so and to give some more evidence for transferring knowledge. I think the competitive framework should be some of the OpenMRS community should identify it as basics. What I'm trying to say that, Paul, because some of a lot of the implementers are looking for some direction from OpenMRS founders to transfer that in a consistent manner, not as a programmer or developer, but as a set of model of delivering something that is working at the implementation level. With that in mind, CAL is really a long-term investment. To get to master level take a long time, but when you got a mass of people, you need a quick competing skills. Then it is, especially here, that data collector, they used to be cleaners first, and they become data collectors. It's like they're still human beings, a cleaner and a data collector, and they got a brain who you can actually, with a well-defined training package, you can transfer that in a consistent manner and make them feel human. And I say that in experience. I mean, when I got to Australia, couldn't speak English, I was a cleaner. But then when I spoke the language, and the OpenMRS language of sense of community is what really the value to society. Not the coding. Not the coding is primitive. It's the actual sense of values that OpenMRS is bringing to the countries and what we want to transmit in long term.
I guess I can just describe the model we've used for training in Rwanda. So we've been running an 11-month training course in Kigali in Rwanda. It's a project funded by IDRC, and students are selected from universities there. So 10 months ago we did interviews, set exams, tried to select what we could find as the best students available from the universities there, and then they've been paid a decent salary to study on this course. They did 9 months of studying, and they're now in a sort of final 2-month stage of actually developing modules. So it's our experience that it's taken 9 months of full-time teaching to get students up to the level where they can actually develop independently and develop also high-quality modules. It would probably be better coming from someone who's been through the Rwandan university system, but I would just say that our experience has been that people with computer science degrees can't necessarily program. So I hope that hasn't insulted anyone. So I mean, we've had to, I feel like we sort of taught programming fundamentals from scratch, web design, a lot of web design stuff from scratch, and that does take 9 months. But I feel like we've got to the stage now where these people are able to program modules to a high quality level. Obviously, looking forward, the model we've used this year is probably not very sustainable, where we have students being paid to study, funded by IDRC. Now, we are looking at integrating our course with one of the universities in Rwanda. It'll probably take about a year to do this, but hopefully it will eventually become a master's course, and maybe we can work with the university to improve the quality of their undergraduate computer science courses, so that then we're not reteaching what should be taught at the undergraduate level, and we can just create a master's which is specifically sort of hands-on computer science based medical informatics, software development for e-health.
The struggle with is that we have our funding and our eagerness and a lot of pressures on us to get stuff out quickly, and the fastest and cheapest way to do it in the short term is just to use people who already can do it well. But the long-term goal clearly is to build capacity or strengthen capacity for people who can't do it yet, and that's a real struggle. And I'm curious what people's experiences is with remote mentorship. In the cases I've seen, that's really been hard, as opposed to needing co-present mentorship of again, whoever has the ability to do it, trying to take someone who's more junior and bringing them to. I don't know if there's sort of good mechanisms that make remote mentorship work well, or if we should really try to look for co-present mentorship.
I wanted to talk about something that's a little different than formal training programs, and we're trying to experiment with exchange programs, and in particular with the University of Makerere. We've had Danielle and Charles interact with our team from Pakistan on OpenMRS, and we're looking to expand that collaboration by actually having people from there come and spend weeks at end in Karachi, and then have our team members go and spend weeks at end with their team. This is outside the classroom environment, of course, but I think it's really, in the one experience we've had yet, it really did sort of move up a notch the team's level of information back in Karachi, and for us the important. And I think for all of us, it was a real demonstration of what somebody who's not here said. It's a South-South teaching system. We don't need to have people come in from North America, and that's essentially what OpenMRS wants. You need to have these centers of excellence where we're teaching ourselves, and hopefully then at some point there's feedback to North America as well. It's a two-way street, and so I'm just sort of interested in developing those kinds of exchange programs, because for us to send somebody off for a master's degree or for an 11-month course, with the number of people that we have, it's not feasible. And it's also possible that if we did that, some of them might just sort of immigrate, go somewhere else, with those advanced training or whatever. And not that we want to stop people from getting trained, but if the network could actually support and construct an exchange program where we could all benefit from having sort of some set standards, like we can send people to Botswana or Rwanda, or and people can come and get Asia and Africa engaged among themselves. You know, it would really be very useful.
I totally agree with that. Actually, we got in mind already. Chile, Latin America, with Usher, and in Africa, because in a sense, what have been happening in past training, I've been involved, and people stayed in the developed countries and they don't come back. I'm an example of that too. It took me 20 years to realize to go back, but we can't afford that with OpenMRS, because once you actually train the developer, we need it on site in order to keep transmitting those skills. And an exchange program we suggested started with 2 weeks first, and the idea was to copy a little bit the behavior, not necessarily how to code, because you can do remotely, but the behavior of working as a team. Some of those culture things don't exist in developing space. This open, the person who got the knowledge somehow got the social status in developing world and is not used to work as a team. But if you exchange and see a team that is no differentiation between an engineer, a doctor, and a technician, it really encourage them to work as a team.
A long time ago, I read on the OpenMRS website that there was this grand vision of creating a system that you don't necessarily need to be a sophisticated programmer to set up and start using. And I think it will always be the case that you at least have support on some level from programmers, and we certainly very much need that now. But if we do want to have a real distinction between implementers or users and developers going forward, and I hope we do, then I think we need to figure out who we're talking about training, because as I heard it, the way Paul explained Centers for Excellence is that he sees OpenMRS, the online community, and these meetup groups continuing to be kind of a hub for developers. And everything I know about IT, I kind of learned online, and you can eat your own dog food that way, and it sort of seems to work. IRC and the email lists and all that. That doesn't work as well for implementers, especially at this point, because there are no resources on the wiki. Things, in the how to start an implementation discussion just now, we were trying to talk about, like, what are the server requirements? Like, really, how much RAM do you need if you're going to enter this many forms, observations per day? Like, I haven't been able to find that information anywhere. And so that kind of really practical training, like, what strategies are people using to get stable electricity in, off-grid or unstable grid sites? In Malawi, turns out it's car batteries. I had no idea until I moved to Malawi, lived there for a while, and met up with Baobab, which I would already call like a center for excellence. So when we're talking about training, there's certainly always going to be training of developers, and I hope I'll be able to continue to participate even peripherally with that community online. But for Centers for Excellence, I hope we'll be focused on people who aren't developers as well. And I'd love to hear, I'm not thinking about master's programs. I'm thinking about like workshops, or even having like local entities that, for example, a private hospital or the Ministry of Health could hire Baobab to come build their EMR, to help them figure out what a concept dictionary looks like, and to train local people. Are people, has there been active thought about training non-developers yet? And are there any experiences with that?
My initial comments about you have to get in the bowl to talk. Never mind. I'm not talking then.
I think certainly, just to answer that question, for example, the training programs that we have, I lecture through the University of South Africa on an MPH program. So those are non-developers. That is designed, so it's an MPH medical informatics done by distance learning, and that's targeting life scientists. So we have a lot of doctors who are taking that course, so they're not going to be programming, but it gives them and understanding. So, you know, these are the guys who are going to be designing structured medical record forms, hopefully better ones than we get at the moment. So I just wanted to pick up quickly on something that Amir was talking about, was these exchange programs. Do you think that those work better where there's a defined project that the people are working on? So in other words, is it your experience that where the person both is working on a specific implementation and both goes with that as a problem to work on, like a problem-solving kind of experience, and then also comes back, does that assist in that?
Yes, it does, and that's exactly the way we did it. I think without that structure, without that focus of a project and problem solving for even before arriving, it's going to be, you know, go and see Botswana sort of an experience, as opposed to go and solve a problem for that team on the ground. And because if it's a project, then it's a priority for the receiving side, I mean, the guys who are inviting people over, and we put resources into it. If it's just a come and see and learn sort of thing, then you know you want somebody else to pay for it, because the project can't justify it. So clearly, I think you would want that. You would very much want projects to, you know, sort of identify a problem and then have the teams working before they get in, make best use of their time. And we've had Danielle and others continue working with us even after they went back.
So just to answer, I think, the question a bit about who gets trained, it's interesting because in the last year or 2 years with MVP in doing these implementations, you know, there's been a wide range of capacity failure, I guess, in the sense that, you know, from just basic computer operations to the you know, design, implementation of forms, to even, you know, working, and for those people in the developed world too, working with the clinicians, there's usually quite a bit of resistance. And so I think when, at least I was envisioning how the Global Partners program was going to work, and we were, how would we solve those problems? I was first thinking that it would be very grounded in actual real world situations. So not a lot of book learning, but much more around specific applications or specific training. That it would not be long-term training, although master's training is certainly a potential result of a longer-term process, but that there would be shorter course kinds of work, and that we would really reach out to the people in the field, either the kind of implementer type people who really would be responsible or potentially being groomed for these kind of new roles. We're calling them e-health specialists, who sit at the district level and actually know how to use these kinds of technologies to answer real world questions. But then even go all the way out to the providers, and actually potentially similar to the public health training program, because it serves two purposes. It not only helps make the systems a lot better, and I think someone said here that it's often easier to teach a clinical person some computer science than it really is to have a computer science person learn all kind of the clinical stuff and the experience of the field work. And so in a relatively short course, you can get those people helping you to correct, or not correct, but develop more appropriate kinds of solutions. But then the other side is, there's a kind of another ulterior reason for this, which is that you co-opt them, because then you eliminate their resistance when it comes to actually implementing these things, because it's not, very quickly that they learn this does work and this does help it, and then they're out there in the field, they become your champions. And it's much easier when you have them in the ground saying why this is such great than when you have to come in and visit them and say why you need a medical record. So I think those are reasons why I think we're pushing down that path for these kinds of training.
Taking a step back to the exchange program and the ideas of getting people out into the field and these on-site mentorships, and working within our team ourselves and within the OpenMRS community, skills around implementation are really scarce. So from a project manager's point of view, in a sense, sacrificing someone for 4 months to go out into the field is a very, very heavy burden to take. And what I'm interested in understanding is more alternatives of how we can lessen that burden. I think one of the things that has come out of this conversation is the need for clearly defined training courses and very quick upscaling sessions where, I'll be honest, a lot of our guys are sitting doing implementation work around forms and reports. So having a course where we do implementers be able to design and develop forms and reports really quickly and taking a month to scale up somebody from a graduate computer science or a IT, information systems degree to understand how to do this and alleviate a lot of this burden, and again bringing these into these training courses that you were chatting about, and saying, fine, we've now got a system which we can run through and have an OpenMRS certified implementer who's able to implement HTML forms, X forms, against reports, who understands how to build concepts correctly. And coming back again to the documentation on the wiki for implementers, it is a fantastic tool for developers. It's a great sandbox of recording what's going on. But I'm really excited to say we've reached a stage in the OpenMRS community where we've outgrown the wiki. The wiki is becoming this fishbowl of ideas and knowledge that needs to be better documented, well organized, and we as implementer groups and those doing implementations, we should take responsibility for that. And I'm talking to my team, myself, as well as many others here. As you find something and you reach that learning point, that knowledge point, it needs to be documented. And then stepping back, analyzing how we can look at the wiki going forward to extract from it the data we need.
Carl, picking up on the fact that we need to document things better, but Isaac, hearing your cry from a practical point of view of power and things like that, and hearing breakthroughs that were made in Kenya in terms of the partnership with Ericsson in terms of communications and connectivity through GSM, this is something that's close to my heart, that we're able to document. Do we use an inverter? Do we use a generator? Do we take our chances with the public grid of electricity? What air conditioning systems work? What are the best server configurations? These are below the level of an implementer, or certainly not a developer role, but something that's equally important. And a basic networking issue at a hospital that both you and I know about, without that being conquered correctly, no implementation is going to work.
And correct, and I think this is a great opportunity, OpenMRS, to bring that training as a package, and as a package, not educational package, but as a training package for OpenMRS implementation, which we're proposing in Chile, and we will propose it officially as well, of building a community and partnership. The university interested in this, but the health ministry as well, and it's another vendors are interested to witness the process of OpenMRS. And we're looking at that is to actually install OpenMRS in the School of Health. That way they can see how an electronic health record or medical record works. And the Director of Health actually seen OpenMRS because he does travel a lot around the world, and he said he got 5,000 students. Therefore, part of the first module will actually say how an electronic medical record system will work. Therefore, that's I think it's important just to look at training package as a tool, but at the same time as a step to building capacity for the country, which is to bring partnership, universities, government, private sector, because that's the long-term goal.
I think you could definitely say that in a large way, OpenMRS has been built on the backs of some incredible academic organizations. I mean, that's been huge, and that's a lot of the reason why there's such a robust data model. And it's a really sophisticated system. It's not just usable. I mean, it's not just practical. But I think part of the reason that the leadership is saying so strongly that we're not an implementing organization is that the academic model doesn't really support that, because there's not a business model for it. Academic institutions aren't designed to mobilize resources for the nuts and bolts of going and installing information systems everywhere. They build expertise. That's what they produce. And I don't know if there's anyone from Baobab in the room, but I mentioned earlier that I would sort of almost consider them like a center for excellence, because they've done an incredible job of building up, their own expertise within their team, like training and promoting from within and hiring local people, and they're, the guys to turn to for health information systems in Malawi now. And so I wonder if there's maybe, if it might be useful to have a distinction between sort of academic centers that train people to do everything with OpenMRS, from develop it in a really robust way all the way down, to organizations that exist and earn their daily bread by helping other organizations install. They may not be developing their own stuff. Organizations like eHealth Systems, like Baobab, who can hire themselves out to ministries of health, to private hospitals, to whoever, who don't have other large responsibilities to deal with. Anyone have comments on that?
Certainly, if that's a question, the answer for me is absolutely yes. There needs to be the delineation between the academic, the implementation, and then the practical rollout. It's a functional role of a very specialized piece of software and a function within a medical system and within a government. But it's absolutely yes.
Just building on that idea there around getting these organizations, as you say, make their bread and butter out of doing this. One of the dangers that I see around that is it becomes a free-for-all, unchecked group of or company doing what it wants in, for lack of a better term, playing the jackal around the lion's kill. There's this big pot of lack of skills. If that's not, in a sense, guided by best practices of how this should be done, and as a community, we need to set those. We need to say, this is what we're expecting. If you claim to be an OpenMRS, if I dare say, certified partner, you need to work against these. This is what you need to come up against. So you don't have somebody giving a poor level of service, because the system's as good as the weakest link. And if you have a company running around claiming to do good, but actually not doing so good, you're going to destroy the reputation of everybody.
If I may, I think you actually introed what I was going to say perfectly, because I agree that some of the groups that have the practical experience now are probably those best able to train or build training modules for groups that want to go live. But what I was going to suggest, the role that the OpenMRS as an organization could play would be to create a certification process of some kind, or create the standards by which you can measure those trainers, so that there is consistency of understanding and approach, and that, like you said, you don't have the jackals just selling junk and frustrating individuals. But so I would throw that out there as kind of something to consider, and following again the model of OpenMRS being something that people can get experience in, and then sell themselves out as, at the next level.
And I think this is what the public is asking, is to maintain the quality of the founders in the cells, the quality of delivering something that it gives results. Now that it goes to a critical mass, if the value of these OpenMRS is doesn't maintain, very quickly people will lose the trust that OpenMRS have gained through the years. Therefore, I totally support what Carl and our colleague is saying here, that to maintain that quality is reaching right now, there have to be a clear pathway to, I will call it certification, whatever you want to do it, but to maintain that quality, because governments would never invest in a university to provide that electronic health record. It doesn't make sense. And unfortunately, governments, we have with little options to go with someone who provide a quality service.
So one potential alternative, and this, I'm in all for OpenMRS certification, but there are some constraints I think that some people have in being too one-sided. Maybe this is a little bit what you were talking about, Carol, that there's essentially a bias that comes when you say I'm an OpenMRS solutions provider as opposed to an eHealth solutions provider. And so another alternative might be that OpenMRS community works quite closely with, let's say, the American Medical Informatics Association or whatever they are, to define what those criteria are, and then either the American college or EMEA, the International Medical Instrument, could somehow provide the certification in a more unbiased way, and then therefore if the solution actually was not an OpenMRS, maybe it's a CARE2X solution that's better, or it's, you know, whatever, that there's no sense that you're kind of coming in with a biased perspective. It may be, since a lot of these solutions are very practically oriented, that you specifically want to bring in an OpenMRS or a DHIS or whichever program, but just this might be another way, is by partnering with those other academic or quasi-objective people.
So when we talk about centers for excellence, then, are these like the very brainy academic groups that could look at an organization and say, yeah, you're probably qualified? Or are they more like, I mean, that was just a question.
Oh,
Since
it's the
you've
most
learned
qualified.
most recently.
I don't necessarily see centers of excellence as being one or the other, or they could be a hybrid of both. I mean, to me, it's a collection of individuals that's committed to being excellent at OpenMRS in all aspects, right? And, you know, I'm not necessarily certain that you need to be, you know, from, you know, a PhD or master's. I don't think that all of the people that are within the Center of Excellence need to have those qualifications in order to be experts at OpenMRS. In fact, some of the people that I know that are most expert in OpenMRS don't have any of those qualifications. So I don't necessarily see it that way. I just want to kind of reiterate what I said before. I think in order to be an expert in OpenMRS, you need certain proficiencies and you need experience, right? And so how people arrive at those proficiencies could be either through self-learning, so they teach themselves somehow, or they get didactic courses. But they have to be brought to a certain level of proficiency because there are certain presumptions that we make of understanding about things in order to be able to understand why I need a concept dictionary, you know, in order to build a system, you know, why the design makes sense, you know, how do I actually do that? If I want to change it, how would I change it? There might be different expertise within each of the individuals that are a part of a center of excellence, but I think the collective need to have, and you represent the whole spectrum of that experience. And I think Baobab's a good example of where they do have that expertise, right? And I'm not certain that they're all formally trained. So I don't necessarily think that the Center of Excellence needs to have an academic backing at all. I just think they need to have certain expertise. I think they need to have a lot of experience and the willingness to teach others. That's what defines a Center of Excellence.
Just a time check, we're about almost halfway through our tea break.
Oh, so last comment from Chris.
Well, good timing, eh?
I don't want to cut it short. I just wanted to let people know.
Well, you did.
Maybe
James,
last
I'm
two
sorry,
comments.
James. I'm sorry,
Okay.
James. I didn't see you.
Actually, James, why don't you go first, please?
Maybe you should have been last, but okay, I'm looking at all those discussions and I'm looking at Center of Excellence as this picture we are creating of what we want OpenMRS to be. We are looking at what we want eventually to OpenMRS to look after some years, what we want people to do, the capacity we want to build. And I'm looking at maybe this group, as we leave this place, we have the next step we are taking to building capacity for the people who are going to implement OpenMRS, for the people who are going to be developers. Because I think if we have our next step, we can look at, are we going for exchange programs? Are we going to create an academic like degree or such? But what is our next step on capacity building for most of the people? Like an example of what we do back in Kenya is there are people who started implementing OpenMRS before. And what we realize is with time as we grow, we are getting more needs to support the same system. So we are training within ourselves. But the big question is that enough? We need more. Because you're supporting the system and you're training somebody. It becomes a challenge. So what is our next step as we live here? What do we tell ourselves? This is how we are going to build capacity for OpenMRS across the world. At times we get people coming from other organizations to be trained. And you'll find some of them don't get quality time because of there's no kind of a structure to disseminate what you have, to them so that they can go down and really implement all that in the field. So I think once we get like OpenMRS leadership give us a direction, this is the way we can start doing this, and this is the next step that most of the people can go out and start on that. I think we will be able to go outreach to people who want to implement, get them contacting people who have done that, and probably creating a group that a group of experts who can be contacted and can create them for that, so that we can be able to move forward and have more people being able to implement OpenMRS across. And just something to add, there's an aspect of OpenMRS that most people don't look at, and that is IT support. I think as OpenMRS grows, it requires a lot of IT support. From our experience, we realize that. So we may look at the implementation bit, but the whole implementation, the implementation is not complete with entering the form, with development, but there's an IT support, as he was talking about, the capacities, the network. Where do these groups fit in the whole community?
As someone who represents one of the quasi-objective organizations that Andy referred to, I just wanted to underline a point that I think was made earlier, that we are involved in processes like the AMIA Global Partners effort to perhaps develop a set of core competencies for informatics in particular settings, and ideally that would translate into not only some basic curriculum around those core competencies, but also different modes of how that curriculum could best be delivered and used, whether that's through distance learning or mentoring or training, traditional training programs. But I think the one thing that I'm hoping we don't lose sight of with this truly critical need for a more organized approach to training is also one of the key issues that has made the OpenMRS experience different than other more traditional approaches, and that's the difference between training and learning. What's made this effort so powerful and so effective with honestly a limited amount of resources is the peer-to-peer experience-based learning that's gone on through the networks, through meetings like this. And I actually think that sometimes the things that are closest to us we don't see the value in. And this is what makes this effort so unique and so different, that I hope that when we start focusing on more traditional areas like training and capacity building, we don't lose sight of this particular color that is a critical ingredient to the success of this work, and I would argue goes well beyond the software. And in fact, when we talk about centers of excellence, we can also talk about centers of learning, and hopefully not limit it to a software or training. Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say.
Nice. I think we should end on that comment. It's such a good one. Training versus learning. It's a good distinction, actually.
I didn't make it out.